In the summer of 1992, inside a Chicago boardroom, the company's chief operating officer delivered 5 words that ended a 100-year story. No savior was coming. The company was $75 million in debt. It was losing $1 million a month. Suppliers wanted cash up front. The banks had run out of patience. This was Schwinn. For most of the 20th century, it wasn't just a bicycle brand. It was the bicycle brand. The bike in nearly every American driveway. The bike parents saved up for. The bike kids drew in the margins of their notebooks. At its peak, 1 out of every 4 bicycles sold in the United States wore the Schwinn name. And in less than 10 years, the company that owned American childhood was gone. This is the story of how a German immigrant's bicycle shop became a national institution, and how, 4 generations later, that institution let go of almost everything that made it great, right before it needed those things the most. The story starts with a man who wasn't even supposed to be in America. Ignaz Schwinn was a trained bicycle engineer in Germany, sharp enough that by his 20s he was managing a major bicycle factory back home. But his ambitions outgrew the old country. In 1891, he crossed the Atlantic and landed in Chicago, a city in the middle of a full-blown bicycle craze, with dozens of small manufacturers racing to cash in. In 1895, Schwinn partnered with a local meatpacker named Adolf Arnold, who put up the money. Together, they founded Arnold, Schwinn and Company. Chicago at the time had become the unofficial capital of the American bicycle industry.
More than 30 factories in the city were turning out thousands of bicycles a day, and one stretch of Wabash Avenue was so packed with bicycle showrooms that locals simply called it Bicycle Row. In those earliest years, one of the fastest men on 2 wheels in the entire country rode a Schwinn-built machine. Major Taylor, who became the first African-American world champion cyclist in 1899, competed and won on Schwinn equipment at a time when he faced open hostility just for being allowed on the same track as its competitors. For a few years, business was extraordinary. Then, almost as fast as it began, the craze collapsed. By 1905, national bicycle sales had fallen to a quarter of what they'd been just 5 years earlier. Dozens of Chicago's bicycle makers vanished within a few seasons. Schwinn didn't just survive the collapse, he used it. While competitors folded, he bought up smaller manufacturers, consolidated their equipment, and built a modern, efficient factory on Chicago's west side, engineered to produce more bicycles at lower cost than anyone else in the city. By 1908, he'd bought out his own partner and became sole owner of the company that bore his name. Over the next 3 decades, Schwinn quietly became something rare in American manufacturing, a company that competed on quality instead of price, and won. In 1933, Schwinn engineers introduced something that would define the brand for the rest of the century, the balloon tire, the first double-tube, puncture-resistant bicycle tire made in America. It made Schwinn bikes noticeably tougher than anything else on the market. 5 years later, the company unveiled the Paramount, a hand-built racing frame developed with a Belgian immigrant frame builder named Emile Waston.
In 1941, a rider named Alfred Latourneur rode a Paramount to a new world speed record, braking 100 miles an hour behind a pace vehicle. Then, the war came, and Schwinn's Chicago factories, like so many others, turned their machines toward the military effort instead. When peacetime returned, Schwinn returned with it, bigger than ever. The company's post-war cruisers, models like the chrome-fendered, headlight-equipped Black Phantom, looked less like bicycles and more like miniature automobiles. Kids wanted them the way their parents wanted a new car. Backed by a new network of authorized dealers who sold nothing but genuine Schwinn parts and service, the company's dominance became almost total. By the 1950s, roughly 1 in every 4 bicycles sold in America carried the Schwinn name. That dealer network wasn't just a sales channel. It was a loyalty machine. A kid's first bike came from the same shop that would later true its wheels, fix its chain, and eventually sell that same family their next Schwinn, and the one after that. It felt like nothing could touch them. Then, in 1963, Schwinn accidentally invented an entire American childhood. The company's longtime research director, a man named Al Fritz, had noticed something happening on the sidewalks of Southern California. Kids were taking ordinary bikes and customizing them, smaller wheels, long banana-style seats, high ape-hanger handlebars, to look like miniature motorcycles. Fritz convinced Schwinn to turn that homemade style into a real product. The Stingray was born. It became almost overnight the best-selling bicycle in the company's history.
For an entire generation of American kids, the Stingray wasn't just a bicycle. It was status. It was identity. It was the thing you begged for at Christmas. It came in colors with names almost as memorable as the bike itself: flamboyant lime, radiant coppertone, violet, and later outrageous factory customs like the orange crate and the apple crate, chrome-fendered and unmistakable from a block away. But something else was happening, quietly, underneath that success. Kids who'd grown up customizing their Stingrays kept customizing. Through the 1970s, that same do-it-yourself instinct, smaller frames, tougher tires, stripped-down builds, gave birth to two entirely new categories of cycling: BMX racing and, a little later, mountain biking. In Northern California, some of the very first mountain bike prototypes were built using old Schwinn frames and Schwinn's own balloon tires, adapted to survive bombing down fire roads at speed. A young entrepreneur named Mike Sinyard, tinkering with exactly that kind of modified bike, would go on to found Specialized, a company that helped turn mountain biking into a billion-dollar category Schwinn had no real part of. Schwinn's own bicycles had helped invent the future of cycling, and Schwinn itself almost completely ignored it. By then, the company was being led by Ignaz's grandson, and by most accounts, he saw little reason to chase what looked like a passing fad for teenagers. The company that had built its reputation on anticipating what young riders wanted now watched two entirely new markets form around products it had accidentally inspired and declined to join either one. To be fair, it wasn't an obviously foolish call at the time. BMX bikes looked, to an older generation of executives, like toys.
Mountain bikes looked like a fringe hobby for a handful of hippies riding modified cruisers down fire roads outside San Francisco. Nobody at Schwinn's Chicago headquarters could have known those two fads would eventually define the entire bicycle industry. But that had always been Schwinn's real advantage, spotting what looked like a fad before anyone else did, the way Al Fritz had spotted the Stingray. This time, for the first time in decades, that instinct simply wasn't there. It wouldn't be the last opportunity Schwinn let slip past. By 1980, domestic competitors like Trek, Specialized, and Cannondale were building lighter, more advanced bicycles that increasingly outperformed anything coming out of Schwinn's aging Chicago plant. These newer companies were experimenting with aluminum and composite frames, modern gearing, and specialized designs for racing, touring, and off-road riding. Schwinn, still largely committed to the steel frame cruisers and three-speeds that had defined its golden age, started to look less like an innovator and more like a company selling yesterday's bicycle. Then a labor strike hit the Chicago factory, disrupting production at the worst possible moment. To keep dealers supplied, Schwinn turned to a relatively new manufacturing partner in Taiwan, a company called Giant. Giant stepped in and helped keep Schwinn's shelves stocked through the strike. It seemed, at the time, like exactly the right call. By 1983, Schwinn had shut its Chicago factory floor for good, laying off around 1,800 workers and shifting the bulk of its manufacturing to Giant permanently. For many of those workers, some of whom had built Schwinn bicycles for decades, it wasn't just a job that disappeared.
It was the end of a trade passed down inside families on a factory floor that had shaped bicycles for nearly 90 straight years. For a while it worked. Bicycles kept arriving. Costs went down. But the partner Schwinn had leaned on to survive was learning everything it needed to know about building a world-class bicycle and had no intention of staying a contractor forever. Within a few years, Giant launched its own bicycle brand and began competing directly against the very company that had helped make it a manufacturing powerhouse in the first place. Giant didn't just compete, it thrived. Within a couple of decades, the company Schwinn had once treated as a backup supplier would grow into the largest bicycle manufacturer in the entire world. Schwinn had trained its own replacement. Searching for a way out, Schwinn tried opening a factory of its own in Hungary, hoping to diversify away from its increasingly awkward relationship with Giant. The Hungarian plant produced a line of bikes called the Woodlands, but quality problems plagued the operation almost from the start. Welds failed inspection, paint jobs came out uneven, finished bicycles sat warehoused, unsellable, while the company burned through cash it didn't have. In 1991, Schwinn shut the Hungary venture down. It had lasted only a few years. It would turn out to be the company's last real chance to fix things.
Meanwhile, back home, Schwinn had started opening its own company-owned retail stores, a move meant to boost the brand directly to consumers. Instead, it alienated the very independent bike shops that had spent decades selling Schwinn products loyally. Many of those shops quietly started stocking Trek, Specialized, and Cannondale instead. The same loyalty machine that had once been Schwinn's greatest asset was now quietly working against it. By the early 1990s, Schwinn was sourcing virtually all of its bicycles from overseas manufacturers it didn't fully control, competing against companies that outpaced it in design and increasingly unwelcome in the very stores that had built its reputation. At the head of the company sat Ed Schwinn, Ignaz's great-grandson. Those who worked with him during this period often described him as a capable businessman, but one without his ancestors' obsession for the bicycles themselves. There was no single moment that broke Schwinn. No U.S. factory, no loyal dealer network, and no answer for where the market had gone. By the summer of 1992, the math simply stopped working. On October 1992, Schwinn Bicycle Company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Even the bankruptcy came with one final complication nobody quite expected. The right to use the name Schwinn itself didn't legally belong to the failing company. It belonged to a separate family trust. Any buyer who wanted the company would also have to negotiate separately with the Schwinn family, just for permission to keep using their own name on the bicycles. It took a Chicago investment group led by Sam Zell to finally close the deal in 1993, reportedly paying around $40 million to acquire what remained of the company and the right to keep building bikes under a name the family no longer controlled. Not every branch of the family walked away empty-handed. That same year, another of Ignaz's great-grandsons, Richard Schwinn, quietly bought the company's old Paramount factory in Waterford, Wisconsin, together with a business partner. There, away from the corporate wreckage, they kept hand-building high-end frames in the old tradition, a small, stubborn ember of the original company that never went out. The main Schwinn brand didn't stay stable for long. In 2001, under its new post-bankruptcy ownership, it filed for bankruptcy again and was purchased by a company called Pacific Cycle. Pacific Cycle was later folded into a larger corporation, and eventually, ownership of the Schwinn name passed into the hands of a Dutch conglomerate on the other side of the world. Today, Schwinn bicycles are largely built overseas and sold in big-box retail stores, the same shelves as hundreds of other brands, rather than through the exclusive dealer network the family had spent generations building. And yet, the fascination with what Schwinn used to be has never really faded. Collectors still hunt for original Stingrays at estate sales. Vintage Black Phantoms sell for thousands of dollars restored. A new documentary on the company's rise and fall, narrated by champion cyclist Lance Armstrong, recently retold the story to audiences who never lived through it firsthand. People don't get nostalgic over companies that never mattered. Somewhere in a garage or a driveway in nearly every American town, there's probably still an old Schwinn, maybe a Stingray with a cracked banana seat, maybe a cruiser nobody's ridden in years, leaning against a fence, slowly rusting. It's easy to look at that bike and see nostalgia, a childhood, a simpler time.
It's harder to see the whole story behind it. 100 years of family pride, a decade of missed turns, and a final generation that discovered too late that the thing keeping a company alive isn't its name. It's whether anyone still cares enough to fight for what that name is supposed to mean. Ignaz Schwinn crossed an ocean with nothing but a mechanic's training and a hunch that Americans would fall in love with the bicycle. For most of a century, his family proved him right. In the end, it wasn't foreign competition alone that ended Schwinn. It was a company that stopped being curious about the very thing it had once understood better than anyone else in the world: what a kid staring at a bicycle in a store window actually wants to feel when they ride it away. The Schwinn name is still on millions of bicycles today. The company that earned it isn't.